My name is Stephanie Baker, and I am with the Alzheimer's Association Cleveland area chapter. My role is Education and Diversity Outreach Coordinator, so I spend a lot of my time out in the community working with families, the community members, and also professionals to learn different skills and learn more about the disease of Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. So a lot of these topics start to come up, and one very common area that we see questions is in regards to legal planning. And when we do this program in person, we do bring along an elder law attorney just because it can be such a complex topic and there can be so many in-depth questions. However, today it's just me. And so I'm going to get you some of the basics, and then hopefully that's a good starting place for you should additional questions arise or should you decide that you need to look into it a little bit more. Legal and financial plans are important for everyone. You know, this is something that beyond even just people who have a diagnosis of some form of dementia in their family, everyone should be making legal and financial plans. But it's especially vital for individuals with dementia and their families. When we think of Alzheimer's disease specifically, one of the first symptoms that goes along with that is the memory loss. But it really can affect many different areas of the person's brain processing, such as decision-making and other things like that, complex processing. And so this is one of the reasons it can be so important for people with dementia to make sure that they are doing some of this planning early on. And that's one of the key words. I hope everyone goes home today remembering that word early, because so often we see families that come to us in crisis or an emergency happens, and at that point it's so much more difficult to get this situation under control and get these documents in place. And so the word you want flashing in the back of your head today is do this early, plan ahead. Upon diagnosis, family and friends should really help the person make the plans much sooner rather than later. And why is this? One reason is it allows for more informed planning of complex issues. I know even myself, I hear some of these different terms and I think, oh, what is that document? Or, oh, I know I've heard that before. Or is that something I need to do? And in a moment of stress or in an emergency situation, it can be a lot more difficult for us to make an informed decision and do the research and gather all of the specific information we need. Whereas when it's not a time of emergency, it allows us to really educate ourselves and learn more specifically about these different documents and ask the questions. Also, a person with the diagnosis will have a voice in their decision making. So one of the things about Alzheimer's is it's a progressive disease. Early on, many people with this diagnosis may still be out volunteering, a part of a civic group. They come with you to the senior center. They're very involved in their community and are very able to make some of these decisions along with their partner or their family. However, as the disease progresses, it progresses through stages. And in the middle and later stages, the person needs a lot more supports in place. And at that point, they may not be as able to be a part of the decision-making process. And my third point I wanted to make is it avoids difficult consequences for a family if they wait too long. Think about if you have 7 children. And as much as your children may get along really well and you have a great family situation at home, when an emergency hits and everyone wants to do the right thing, people can all have different opinions about what that right thing is. And so it really is important to take some of the stress off of the people around you who may end up needing to make those decisions. What are some goals that we should have with legal and financial planning? One is to make plans for health care and long-term care. Another would be to make plans for our finances and our property. And the third would be to designate someone to make decisions for the person with dementia when he or she is no longer able to do so. So even if we're doing this planning now, that person with the diagnosis could still be very involved in their decision-making until that point where they're no longer able to do so. So I think you can agree. I'm not going to be able to cover all this information in 30 minutes. Today is going to be a little bit more of a starting place. We're going to learn about some of the important documents to have in place and things to consider in some of those beginning stages of planning. So let's first look at some of these legal documents. And advance directives are documents that identify a person's preferences about their treatment, care, and end-of-life wishes. These are important to have in place because when the decision needs to be made by the family or friend, they will know the person's wishes and they can make it easier to think clearly when the issues are not emotional. The decision has already been made, so it takes some of the emotion out of it. My father had to have an unexpected surgery last year, and my mom and I literally was at work when I got the phone call, and I rushed downtown to meet my mom, and he was going to be having the surgery the next morning, and we were sitting there saying goodbye to him and good night, and my mom had to bring up, she's a social worker who's worked with older adults for years, and she brought up advance directives and started asking my dad questions about what his wishes would be if something were to happen in surgery. And I remember this feeling in the pit of my stomach about how it was so uncomfortable to have that conversation in that moment and really to think through some of the different pieces of what could happen. But she had seen the situation happen before and was thinking ahead to wanting to know what his wishes were to make sure that they were being honored. Both family members and healthcare providers should keep copies of current advance directives, including the durable power of attorney for healthcare and the living will. There's actually a program that the Alzheimer's Association partners with called Medical Alert and Safe Return. And 6 out of 10 people with Alzheimer's will wander at some point. And this program is to, the main crux of the program is to have ID bracelets available and the person documented into a system if they were to wander at some point so that the family could find them if an emergency personnel found this individual and knew that they had wandered. But one of the additional incentives of the program is that some of these documents can be confidentially stored with the rest of your information and then made available when needed. Medical Alert has a web page with links to forms for advance directives and instructions for each state as well. So that's one kind of resource if you're looking for that. In addition, it's recommended that the person with dementia has signed a medical release form so that all information can be shared with families. Be sure it identifies the names of all family members who might be involved in the care. Due to medical privacy standards through HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, this practice has become more common in recent years. So many of us have had to sign that form before when we go to the doctor's office, but one important thing to understand about that form is it only allows the physician to share information and knowledge about the person with dementia with their caregivers who are on that form. It does not give the caregiver the ability to make decisions related to the care. So that's where the advance directives documents become important, clarifying who can make those decisions. And that's a very important piece of documentation. When a person with dementia no longer has the ability to make decisions about medical and financial issues, someone needs to step in and make those decisions. Ideally, they would have previously identified one or more individuals to act on their behalf in a document called the durable power of attorney. And this term durable, you've heard me use now, really means that it's lasting indefinitely from the point the person can no longer make decisions until the time they pass away. So that means that it's an indefinite time once it begins. A durable power of attorney for health care will designate another person to make health care decisions regarding treatment, providers, life support, clinical trial participation, and medical record access when the person's no longer able. That's one of the things I get a lot of questions about, is how can a person be a part of clinical trials possibly later on when they may not be able to vocalize that that would be something they were interested in. And so this is another area of crossover there. A durable power of attorney for finances and property would designate another person to make decisions regarding finances, such as income, assets, and investments when the person's no longer able to. So those are those two power of attorney documents. Another important advance directive to have in place is called a living will. The living will would spell out what medical treatment a person does or does not want near the end of life. So for example, knowing whether a person would want artificial life support can provide peace of mind to those family members who have to make the hard decisions. Having a living will in place helps ensure that the person lives and dies according to their wishes, and also helps physicians know that they're carrying out the person's wishes without the risk of liability, which can help improve the communication among care team. So if the physician knows that they're doing what the person would want, through it being spelled out in these documents, that can be really helpful to improve the relationship between the family members or caregivers and that physician. I think that this also takes some of the weight off of the family members of making that really hard decision when it's emotional. You know, we have this person that we care so much and unfortunately is going through this really difficult situation, and I might think that my mom would want one thing and my brother might think my mom would want something else. And when we're in that moment of emotion, it can really tear families apart. And so you're almost doing a disservice to your family by not having some of these things in place when that weight may fall on them at another time. It's an important way that you can support them later on when things could happen. And one of the beauties of this is that, you know, it may come to a point that doesn't become an issue, but you have everything in place in case it does. It's that planning ahead and planning early piece. So the last set of documents I want to discuss on this page before we move on to are the legal documents to offer a peace of mind about a person's finances and property. The standard will is used after a person dies and determines how their estate should be distributed. It indicates who they choose as the executor to manage the estate, and it also names beneficiaries. The other document is called a living trust, which provides direction about the person's assets. It allows them to pool financial resources into one place and provide instructions about how to handle those resources. So to do this, a person appoints a trustee, and that trustee would follow instructions after the person with dementia is no longer able to manage his or her affairs. While a living trust can be very expensive to set up, they can be convenient because they include many different types of properties in one place, like bank accounts, stock holdings, real estate. They're also useful because they can help avoid the cost and time involved in probate, during which courts evaluate the validity of a will. And this also just brought up one other point I want to have in mind, which is a little bit less of a formality, but I just want to mention that beyond some of these formalized ways of making sure that the finances are protected, you also want to look at your just day-to-day life. And I had worked with a caregiver whose husband had always done the bills and always done the paperwork. And she said, you know, he was in the early stages and he was having so many losses, and I really wanted him to still be able to do something. And so for a little while, he was still doing the bills. And then one day she realized that every single piece of paper that came in the mail asking for money, she thought was a bill. So if you think about all those magazine subscriptions, the requests for donations, so many other things come through the mail asking you for money, and without that ability for him to determine what needed to be paid and what didn't, he was giving away large sums of money that were not able to be taken care of later on. So also these are some of the more formal ways we want to do it, but kind of think about your life in a little bit of a more informal way as possible to make sure that everything is protected. As Alzheimer's disease progresses, the person will eventually be unable to make decisions alone about their care and finances. And the legal system has a way of defining this kind of impairment to clarify what legal documents mean. Legal capacity is the level of judgment and decision-making ability needed to sign an official document or to make medical and financial decisions. Ideally, the documents that we've discussed would be completed in the early stages when the person still has legal capacity. A diagnosis of some form of dementia in itself is not enough to declare that a person is legally incapacitated. However, in some cases, waiting to complete these documents may result in the need to determine legal capacity, which would be handled by a court. And one of the things you can kind of do in your own life is before the person with the diagnosis were to sign a document, you want to talk with them and find out if they understand what the document is and the consequences or benefits of signing it. If you're unsure about a person's ability to understand, a doctor might be able to assist. The requirements of legal capacity can vary from one document to another, and so a lawyer may also be a helpful person to talk to determine what level of legal capacity is required for an individual to sign that specific document. So moving on, if a person can no longer make their own financial and healthcare decisions, somebody else may have to become their legal guardian, also known as a conservator in some of the states. This guardian is appointed by a court to make decisions about the person's care and property. Guardianship is generally considered when a person with dementia is no longer able to provide for his or her own care, and either the family is unable to agree upon the type of care needed, or they're an individual who doesn't have that family support in place. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind in regards to guardianship. Now, the old Medicare versus Medicaid, what is the difference? And this is something that I know is a challenge for us all to really grasp onto. It can be so easy to confuse these two. This slide gives a couple brief points on each to help you kind of distinguish one from another. But just a basic level of understanding, Medicare is a government insurance plan that's generally age-based and federally administered. It's for people 65 or older, people under 65 with certain disabilities, and while traditionally age-based, an individual will be eligible for Medicare coverage regardless of age after receiving the Social Security disability benefits for 2 years. Medicare has a couple of different parts. The Part A, which is often called the hospital insurance, Part B, which is the medical insurance, and Part D, which covers the cost of prescriptions. One important note is that Medicare does not pay for long-term nursing care, such as the kind often needed for people in the later stage of Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. And I do not have much more specifics to give you on this system, but I just want you to know that you could always contact the Social Security Administration, visit Medicare.gov, or call our 24/7 helpline that I'll have up on the screen at the end of the program to get more information about that program. Medicaid, on the other hand, is an assistance-based program that is needs-based, and it's administered by the state. It's based on somebody having a medical need, income, and assets. All combined, they look at that whole picture. The regulations can vary by state because it's state-administered. And also the payments are made directly to the providers, not to the person receiving the assistance. Medicaid can cover long-term care, including most nursing home care. And it's also covered in many states as assisted living and adult day services. So it would just sort of depend based on those state-by-state changes. If an individual has more questions about this, you could call your local area agency on aging Medicaid office, or again, I could refer you to our 24/7 helpline. If you or the person that you are caring for served in the military for any period of time, it's possible that you might be eligible for a number of resources through the Veterans Administration. These veteran benefits I try and talk about everywhere I go because I think that it's something a lot of people don't realize might be out there. It doesn't necessarily mean you specifically had to be an active person in service. There's a whole slew of ways that a person can qualify for these benefits. And so if you have any connection that you think you may be eligible for, I would really encourage you to look into it further. The benefits can be offered to veterans themselves, as well as their dependents, surviving family members, reservists, and National Guard members. So like I mentioned, it really can be a whole slew of individuals. And to learn more specifically about veterans benefits, you could contact the Veterans Administration, your local Veterans Service Commission, or that would be another really great question to call our helpline for. So that's one thing to keep in your mind as you're trying to figure out how to pay for care as well. And this last piece I want to really touch on before we kind of start to wrap up here is elder law. And I mentioned before the idea of reaching out to a lawyer, but I really want to focus on elder law. Elder law is a specialized area of legal practice that covers a lot of these things we talked about today: estate planning, wills, trusts, arrangements for care, Social Security and retirement benefits, protection against elder abuse, and other areas involving older adults. So many, like I said, many of those topics that we talked about before would fall into elder law. You can meet with a lawyer, and we really encourage you to look into finding an attorney who specializes in elder law. It's a specific type of attorney. You can see a website on the screen that would give you a National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, and you could also call our helpline for more information about local people that we may have worked with or be knowledgeable of. You are able to complete some of the legal documents we talked about today without a lawyer, but getting legal advice and services from an attorney who specializes in elder law can be especially helpful. Before your meeting, you would want to gather all of your documents related to the assets of the person with dementia ahead of time and bring them with you to the appointment. And if you meet with a lawyer, make sure that you discuss these three issues along with any other concerns. But one would be options for healthcare decision-making for the person with dementia. Number two would be option for managing the person's personal care and property. And number three would be possible coverage of long-term care services, including what might be provided by some of those things we talked about: Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and also even long-term care insurance, which we really didn't have the opportunity to go into today. But those are a couple areas that you want to make sure that you include in your discussion of planning if you do choose to meet with an elder law attorney. As we go ahead and wrap up here, I just want to mention that the Alzheimer's Association has a 24/7 helpline. The 24/7 helpline you do see on the screen, it's 1-800-272-3900, and that is a great place if you have any questions related to what we discussed today, as well as if you have something that we didn't discuss and you wanted to find out about different supports that might be in place. We have caregiver training programs, education, support groups, a number of different ways that we could be a support for you. And really this information just kind of hit on the tip of the iceberg. I know that you might have a lot more legal and financial planning questions. Before I open the floor for questions, I just want to mention that I don't have specifically a background in legal and financial planning, so if you have specific questions, I'd like you to either call the helpline or refer to an attorney. But if you had some basic questions you want to see if I could help with, or if you have any other questions related to Alzheimer's or dementia, I would definitely entertain those at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. We are now going to unmute the callers so that you can ask any questions during this period. And while we're doing that, actually, I have one that I would like to ask. Two. Stephanie, My sister-in-law is in her early 70s, and she is showing signs of dementia. She is like, most of the time she is perfectly fine, and then other times, she's talking about things that didn't happen or that happened like years ago. We've been talking to her. Her husband has, like about filling out the forms or whatever, and she refuses to do that. She doesn't. She won't acknowledge, that she has any issues at all. What do you do in a case like that?
So, Jean, and just so if I'm going to kind of rephrase her question a little bit, just because there's a little bit of background noise, and if somebody's in a location where you have a lot of background noise, I know you're able to mute your phone yourself, if that might be helpful. But I just want to, I think basically what was being asked was that we have a person who's maybe in her 70s and is showing some of those signs of Alzheimer's, but maybe is in denial or not quite ready to accept it. Is that what you were saying, Jean?
Yes.
Okay. And that can be a really difficult situation that I find with a lot of the families we work with. Some people come in completely ready to discuss Alzheimer's, and other people are not at that point. We do on our website have something called the 10 warning signs, and that kind of breaks down Alzheimer's disease into 10 warning signs to look for, 10 things to think about. And they're things you want to notice. Are they happening over and over? Are they happening more and more? And it really depends person by person how you're going to handle that situation. You might be able to go up to one friend and say, hey, I noticed these signs in you and I'm concerned, let's get to the doctor, whereas somebody else may not be as willing to have that conversation. If that's the case, one avenue might be to consider their yearly appointment. Now we have annual visits where we go in and check with our doctor. You may be able to, or somebody in her life might be able to call the doctor ahead of time and say, hey, I'm really worried about this in her. Is that something that you can, discuss or keep your eye out for? Sometimes a great way to get someone to go to the doctor is to tell them that you need to renew their prescriptions if they're not willing to go for another reason. And once you're able to if you're working with a physician who sees people with Alzheimer's and really understands this disease, them and their office and their support staff should really be very helpful in that role. And so that's one of the things. One of the offices I heard about, we work a lot with the cognitive assessment centers. They said that the doctor came down and had a fudge bar with somebody's mom before they went upstairs together to have their little assessment. And so my hope would be that you could have them work with you a little bit.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hadn't really thought of about the doctor, to be honest with you. And then I have one other question a friend of mine asked me to ask. She has her husband in a Alzheimer's unit, and whenever she goes to visit, he becomes very agitated, and she doesn't know why, but it's difficult for her, but they've been married a long time, and she feels that she needs to be there. The facility has asked her not to come, or certainly not to come as often because of, the effect her presence seems to have on him. Can they legally keep her out?
That's a great question. So if a person, she's coming to visit him in a care community, and he's becoming agitated, they've asked him, I don't know specifically of the legal side of it. That would be a really great question for the helpline to get more specifics of legally. But I would think that the better route to go would be to really have a discussion about if there's something specific that's making him agitated, or to kind of look at the situation around it. Maybe she's only able to come after work, and she ends up coming after dinner, and that's a time of day that he's really tired. Or maybe when she comes, he has a hard time after she leaves because she makes a big goodbye situation where it might just be better for her to kind of duck out. And really, I would encourage more of having that kind of discussion with the care staff and the care community of, I want to come visit him, and we have this relationship. How can we make it a more successful relationship moving forward?
Okay. Well, and I'm sorry to have taken so much of your time. Is there anybody else that might have a question, please? No? It sounds like we're done. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you, everybody, for participating. If you have any further questions, please call the Alzheimer's Association 24-hour number. That is on the screen right now. The presentation is over, and we hope that you have a wonderful day. Thanks again, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.